Welcome to the RRK podcast, where we discuss reptile keeping and welfare with some of the world's top reptile specialists. In this episode, we visit the National Centre for Reptile Welfare to learn the truth about reptile rescue and rehoming centres with industry pioneer and legend Chris Newman. Chris, how you doing?
Old and miserable.
As usual.
That is the standard answer, as you well know.
Yeah. So, I suppose the first question really is, where did the idea for a reptile rescue and rehoming centre come from?
That is a good question. I mean, that really stems right back to the beginning of my work with the Animal Welfare Bill back in 2000. So in that political world, rescue and rehoming is seen as a very negative because and it's always rescue. It's never rehoming. It's always all these animals that need to be rescued. And it's used as a very negative tool, and that's why it was used for calling for restrictions and bans on the keeping of reptiles at that period of time.
Because things needed to be rehomed and they were being branded as abandoned.
Yeah, so they use very emotive language: abandoned, dumped, discarded, unwanted. And being involved in the reptile hobby for such a long time, the stories that I was hearing from the likes of the RSPCA, who are presenting an incredibly negative picture about all of these animals are just being, people are buying them on a whim, getting bored with them after 6 months and dumping them, abandoning them or whatever. And I just thought, that's not what I see here, and I want to understand that. And that was the driving force, but this was in 2000. So I'd always wanted to do something to actually understand the issues, because if you understand what the problems are, then you can start to address them. So that's what I wanted to do. And I never thought it would happen. So I only ever heard one side of the story. And, we went on, and it was more and more something I really wanted to do, because it's just used all the time as a very negative context about all this increasing numbers of animals being abandoned, dumped, and wanted. Well, it's certainly true that numbers of reptiles being kept has increased massively. And the numbers are enormous today. So the more you do something, the more there is going to be a problem. So there is always going to be issues. There are always animals that are going to need to be, quote, rescued or whatever it might be. And I hate that term because rescuing is just very emotive. That there was an animal in danger and it's some sort of heroic act to save it. And that's really just a marketing campaign. So that I wanted to understand. Never thought it would happen. We went through the Animal Welfare Bill.
My understanding was that you'd been involved in one way or another with rehoming and rescuing reptiles for a very long time.
So, yes. So at that point in history, so certainly in the early 2000s, I was then chair of the Federation of British Herpetologists. So that is bringing all the clubs and societies together. And my sort of philosophy in life is, if you are part of the problem, then you should be part of the solution. So we cannot argue that the reptile hobby and the reptile industry is not part of the problem, because people are keeping these animals, and some of them, for whatever reasons, may need to find a new home, whatever those reasons may be. So there was always going to be issues and problems. So actually most clubs and societies already did a little bit of rehoming. So all I did was try to coordinate it and bring it all together, which was to say, okay, well, you've got the Portsmouth Reptile and Amphibian Society, and you've got the Essex Reptile and Amphibian Society. But if you've got animals coming into there that need to be rehomed, you may have a limited pool of homes for those, whereas actually it might be somebody in Portsmouth that really wanted it. So therefore, if we could coordinate things, then we can move these animals around. And because I was working in the trade and with the big wholesalers, the Monkfields, the Peregrines, I asked them whether they would help and move animals around. And that's really how it started. So we had quite a successful time, at least finding homes for new animals. What it didn't do was bring any answers as to why these animals were coming, because we didn't capture any of that data. And I have to say, and I'll say it will be very boring throughout all of this, data is king. Government works on facts, data, evidence. We had nothing. So
We'll get onto data in just a second. I wanted to find out about how did your relationship with Bristol and Avon Police come about? Because that's really how this thing started.
So that would be the rescue side.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, there was always two issues. There was rescuing and there is rehoming. So if an animal needs a new home, if you've decided for whatever reason you can no longer keep X and you need to find a new home for it, that was always rehoming to me. Mm-hmm. If the animal's found in the wild, that's a rescue. Mm-hmm. So that was personally how I defined things. So we did a lot of work with DEFRA, so I was involved with lots of the CITES stuff and the police wildlife crime and all that kind of stuff. And we used to meet in Bristol. And how the Bristol thing happened, I have no idea. I can only assume that somebody from the police force was in one of those meetings, took note of what I was saying and took my number. Because I got a phone call from Avon and Bristol Police, and they kind of said, somebody's reported a snake, a large snake in a field. They gave me the address. Could you help? So I kind of thought, there must be a pet shop local to that. So because with Reptar, so I sent a email to Reptar, to Monkfield, Peregrine, do you have any reptile shops in this area? And they come back, gave me some numbers, and I picked up the phone to the first one and just said, this is who it is. Police have reported a snake in a field. Was there any possibility you might be able to go and look at it? And it was, yeah, of course. Done. So it just grew. And so every time they found a snake or a snake, and then it developed. The next one was actually really lovely because it was an elderly lady who was very posh. So the police would ring and say, we've got the report of a snake in a house. I would say, well, you can give. They wouldn't be allowed to give the person's number to me. I said, but give the lady my number, get her to call me. So they would call. So this very posh elderly lady called, and she was lovely. And she said, I can't do the accent, it was just wonderful. I got this large snake in my house, and I'm terrified. So we'll have a chat. And part of what I do is calm them down. So we talk about this, and I said, well, actually, no, he's going to be more scared of you than you are of him and all the rest of it. And what I do is get them to give them a name. If you name the animal, it's no longer a snake, it's Sid or Fred or whatever it might be, and you let them choose a name if you can. They give it a name, and then when we're talking about it, we're not talking about the snake, we're talking about Sid or whatever it might be. And the first thing I have to do is say, have you got a mobile phone? Can you just take a picture of Sid, text it to me, and I'll call you straight back. So once I know what the animal is, then I'll have a strategy of how we're going to deal with it, because there is always the potential it could be something harmful. You know, we've had a couple of adders get in people's houses we've had to deal with. So that's how it started. And she was lovely. So it was a big grass snake. Well, actually that big, it was only about 2 foot. They're always 10 feet long in their mind. So I sort of talked to her and I explained Sid was a native species, a grass snake, and he's obviously just got a bit confused and, you know, he's very frightened. And she obviously had help in the well, I didn't use the word servant, but my person isn't here to help me. And I said, well, look, okay, have you got a little broom, dustpan and brush or broom? She said, well, I have a broom. I said, well, where did it come in? It was obviously coming through the patio doors, and it was a nice wooden floor. So I said, the best thing to do is just get your broom and just sweep him out the door and close the door. He won't hurt you. I promise you he won't hurt you. He's petrified once you go. So, oh, okay. So she put the phone down. And I'd never heard so many expletives. Which I'm not going to do. But it was just this 5 minutes of non-stop expletives, and then a slam of the door. And then she comes back in a very posh accent again. As, thank you very much. Sid is now out the building. And it was just hilarious.
What was the one that you told me about where the snake was returned to the owner before they even realised it was missing?
So that wasn't actually in Bristol. That was up in Essex. So this developed. So because I'm a member of what's called the Partnership for Action Against Wildlife Crime, which we can perhaps talk about at some point, my mobile number had been circulated far and wide. And this was another one that happened. It was another corn snake in a house. So corn snakes in houses are quite common.
Yeah.
They are little monkeys escaping. So again, same process. Send an email to Monkfield and Peregrine. Can you give me some shops in this area? Phoned, lovely gentleman, and I explained the situation. I said, can you help? And he said, well, I'm on my own today. I said, okay, I'll ring someone. He said, no, it's all right. I'll close up. It's fine. I'll close up. It's not far from me. I'll go and do it. I closed the shop up. Half hour later, probably an hour later, he called me back. And he said, yeah, no, I've got it. It's all right. it's been rehomed. And I said, what do you mean it's been rehomed? Because normally what I do is we insist that if a snake comes in, if it's a corn snake, I want them to keep it for 7 days. So we try and find the owner. And then after that, we'll make a decision how we're going to deal with it. And he said, I picked it up, and he said, I recognised it. He said, it's a snake I sold. I knew who the person was who I'd sold it to.
Yeah.
So I went and knocked on his door. And I said, are you missing your snake? And he said, no. And he said, are you sure? And he said, yeah. So he said, can we go and have a look? So he did, and it was missing. So he actually returned the snake to the owner before the owner actually knew the snake was missing.
That's inspired. That's outstanding.
It's brilliant.
And it's worked like that all the time since I've been following you on social media. There seems to be a small issue somewhere with either an escaped snake or a free-range animal somewhere. And you can make an appeal on your social media page on Facebook usually. And within minutes, that problem has been dealt with by the pet trade. Usually someone in the pet trade is dealing with that.
Well, not necessarily just the pet trade, the pet hobbyist. I mean, so I am a technological Neanderthal. I have no idea about any of this thing. And somebody set up a Facebook page for me years ago, and I never used it. And then I started to use it. I have no concept how the damn thing works. But it's just astonishing. So if somebody reports, and we work now with a lot of police and local authorities around the country, if something gets reported to them, they will give the people my number, and then we go through that whole process. And I just put up a post. The first starting point with any of these cases, when somebody rings me to say that they've got something in the house or wherever it might be, the very first thing, get me a picture.
Yeah.
I want a picture. And unfortunately, everybody has their mobile phones these days, so it never fails. You get a picture of it. Sometimes not the greatest picture, but you can soon work out what it is. So I need to know, is it something we need to be worried about, or is it just an escaped pet? So once I know that, I will then call these people back and give them the details. And we will go through a process again, give it a name. If they're scared, quite often they are. If there's a way of containing it, could you put a bucket over it, or could you do something, or close the door, wherever it might be. I've got the picture they've sent me. And I just make a post on Facebook. And it always starts with the word just urgent in bold. Can anyone please help in this area? Postcode. This is what it is. Is there anybody who can help? And you've seen how often we do that. It's frequent. It never fails. We've never once not had somebody come forward.
What's your quickest result from posting it on Facebook to the animal being dealt with?
The quickest from posting on Facebook to somebody being on the way to deal with the animal is 6 minutes. It's typically less than half an hour. 15 to 20 minutes is normal.
That's outstanding that there's such an army of enthusiasts out there who are eager to step in and help when a problem occurs that needs dealing with.
Honestly, it's just so humbling and mind-boggling. And sometimes our most difficult area is London. No bugger drives in London.
Good point.
So it's like a different world. So one part, East London, is a different country to West London. So London is always the slowest, nearly always the slowest. That's changed now because actually over the years we've developed links, and I've got some really good people who are completely mental. I mean, I have to say most reptile keepers are nuts.
Really?
Oh yeah, I know. But so we've got these people now. So I'll still post, but I will then say, can you do it? So London's got a lot better this year.
That's good.
But we get some. We have one in Scotland, and it's like, I looked on the Google, God, no one's going to live in that bloody part of the world.
Out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, they did.
And it got dealt with?
Got dealt with. It was a frog. It's just, almost now the most bizarre remote part of the country you can find, they're probably going to be the quickest to get a response. And it's just, we've only failed once in not actually getting the animal.
Really?
We had a glass lizard in London. Shelter Books music that was found. Cause I assume when he phoned me, said, "I got this big snake," sent me the picture, and it was actually a glass lizard.
How lucky can you be to get a glass lizard as Shelter Cusick?
It gutted me. We didn't get it because I'd love that.
Did it disappear?
Yeah, it went. So by the time it took somebody about half an hour to get there, by the time they got there, it actually gone under the fence into the neighbours next door, and they couldn't get access to it.
Such a shame. They're great animals, aren't they?
Oh, they're magic. But that's the only one that I can think of where we failed to get the animal.
Okay, let's come back to the situation with rescue and rehoming. It was interesting to speak to you shortly after NCRW came onto the scene to realise that emergencies and welfare issues weren't usually the problem. Even though those were the stories that you were hearing most on social media, and especially from the traditional animal welfare organisations. So how's that working now?
So that's the case. It's been really fascinating to see how it's all worked out. So that's why I define between rescue and rehoming. So if the owner needs to rehome the animal for whatever reason, and that could include the animals in ill health, okay, that could be a part of it. Or if it's found. So when I was managed to get this place, became a reality, I sat down and thought how because data, how do I capture the data? What data do I actually want? So that's why I decided that if the animal is surrendered by the owner, they don't necessarily have to bring it in because sometimes they can't. They get a friend to bring it in.
Yeah.
But if it's surrendered by the owner contacts us to ask us to take the animal, that's a rehome. If it comes from a third party, i.e. somebody who doesn't own the animal, that's a rescue.
Such as third parties?
So the third party could be, we've just talked about the animals being found in a house.
Yeah.
That's a rescue.
Yeah.
Okay, if it's been found in the house, found in the wild. Another rescue is actually the owner's died.
Yeah.
And that's actually really common. Another rescue for us would be, and I won't go into we work a lot with the authorities.
Authorities, as in local authorities or police, or?
We will work with local authorities, we work with police, we work with border force. If any of those surrender an animal to us, then that would be marked as a rescue as well, because they're not the owner of the animal.
And what is it possible to discuss what those circumstances might be, if we can talk in generic terms? And if the answer's no, then the answer's no. But
let me give you an amusing story.
Okay,
I like answer it with
stories.
an amusing story. Oh, this is wonderful. The Met Police phoned me up. And so if it's the police, okay, I come to the conclusion the police do not work during the day. Okay, I've never get an animal from the police during the day. It's always 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. So I got a phone call from the police to say, we've got a big snake that's been seized off an individual that's been arrested for murder.
Goodness.
So could we bring the snake down to you? It was like, yes, of course, that's not a problem. So that was about 2 o'clock in the morning when they turned up. Lovely police officer. She brought this beautiful, absolutely beautiful hyper-melanistic Burmese python, about 11 foot long. Absolutely gorgeous. And I kind of said, what's the circumstances? She said, well, I can't go into details. All I can tell you is a gentleman was arrested in his car and this python was found on the back seat. So that's how you got it. And he's been arrested for attempted murder. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we'll look after that. That's fine, no problem. The following morning, actually, so counteracting what I said, I don't know if they work. Maybe they just answer the phone during the day. Mm-hmm. So police phoned me up in the morning to say, we've released the gentleman. Can he come and collect the snake? And it's like, okay, hang on. You've just arrested him for attempted murder. I've now got his snake. I'm not entirely comfortable with this, but yeah, okay, sure, of course, go. And this lovely guy turned up, a young gentleman with a very flash motor turned up to pick his snake, and he was absolutely gorgeous. He was lovely. It was not a problem at all. But it was just quite an amusing story that you get a snake in from attempted murder, and then the person comes to get it back from you the following day.
And did he explain what the situation was?
I didn't ask. I didn't ask.
Really?
Yeah, I'm a coward. He was bigger than me.
That sounds interesting.
So in terms of the police, we will deal with lots of where there's been an issue, where somebody's been arrested. We don't ever get told the circumstances. They've been arrested. There's animals involved. The police actually have a legal responsibility for their animals. If they're arresting somebody and taking them away, and there isn't anybody else in that property to look after those animals, then they need something to be done with that.
Yeah.
So we do quite a bit of that, and then we'll take the animals in, or if we can, we'll leave the animals in situ and maybe just get somebody to look after them during a period of time. It just depends on circumstances.
Well, having those mechanisms in place and being part of the organisational procedures that put those mechanisms into place when those situations arise is without a doubt a good thing, because without it, we'd have problems. There'd be welfare issues.
There is welfare issues. So we will do welfare issues with local authorities where they'll ask our opinion. Somebody's keeping an animal. However, the circumstances that the local authority are involved, we don't know, and we don't ask that. So we would just be involved, and they will send us pictures. And this is the wonderful thing now with technology. Even though I'm a dinosaur and a Neanderthal, I have worked out just about how to use FaceTime. So you can sort of say, well, show me the animals, show me the circumstances, show me the pictures, and we'll give you an honest opinion.
Yeah.
And it's always an honest opinion. If things are bad, we'll say. Very rarely are they bad. Quite a lot of it is the people from the local authorities don't have the experience, so they don't know. So how do you know whether this ball python is in good ideal setup or not? And quite often there will be little issues, and you kind of have a chat and say, well, can I talk to the owner? Will the owner talk to me? And we'll go through things, and maybe we can just help them out and push them and guide them in a little further forward. If there were major problems, we would say, okay. But I'm just racking my brains. We've had very few of those, and typically where you see major issues, it's mental health issues.
Yeah.
And that's some of the most difficult and challenging things to actually deal with, because the people are suffering just as much as the animals.
Yeah.
But that's our starting point to do any of that, is to actually be neutral. So one of the things that we've been doing this year, which is really uncomfortable, is getting involved in evictions. People losing their home, and they've got animals and they don't know what to do. And literally this week I had to deal with one of those. An individual was being evicted from the property. We were contacted by the courts about 6 weeks ago. We were told there was up to 25 snakes involved. When we got there, in fact, the individual actually contacted us separately afterwards, and I didn't know the two were related until literally the day. He'd rehomed everything. He had 12-foot African rock python. Was the one thing that he just physically couldn't find a home for.
Yeah.
So we agreed. So we had, because he didn't contact me until the Tuesday, and it was the conversation that I'm saying, well, actually, I'm in your area tomorrow. And he kind of said, oh, why is that? And I said, well, I can't tell you, but I'm in your area tomorrow. I'll pick the snake up there. And he said, well, was it an eviction? And I said, I'm sorry, I can't tell you. And then he said, it is, isn't it? And I said, I can't tell you. And then he gave me his address, and it was the same address.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, but I'll be there at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we'll deal with it. And it was horrible, because he was absolutely lovely. And you've got all of the cavalry, the police and the bailiffs and all this kind of thing, and he's not entirely pleased with his circumstances, which is understandable. So,
and he'll also care for his animals.
But he cared for his animals. So he was, to me, he was absolutely lovely, and I was sort of outside on the periphery of this, and there's quite a lot of shouting going on, and I kind of said, look, and he said to me, oh, well, you can come up and get the snake. That's not a problem. Then they're going, no, you can't go and get the snake because he might take you hostage and all this kind of thing. And I was saying, no. So they had two officers with us, but he was absolute lovely gentleman. Took the snake, put it in a box, and drove off. And I hate it. I just hate it with a passion. And that's about the third or fourth time this year.
But it is good that the NCRW can step in and deal with those circumstances, because the other options are by far worse options.
I just feel it's what we should do. It's not that side of it. I had never envisaged we would deal with. That was, when this was set up, I had no idea we'd get involved at that level. And sometimes where it's welfare issues, you've also got to be involved, and sometimes you do have to take the animals because there are real issues with it. But you feel a lot of, I hate it. I'm never comfortable. But it's, for me, the first thing I always make clear that we're neutral. So if we have been brought in by the police, local authority, whoever it might be, our position is neutral.
Focused on the animal.
It's on the animals and what's the best we can do with the animals. And quite often I try to negotiate with both sides to see whether we can find a solution. Because for me, the worst thing is taking somebody's animals. So if I can find a way that we can deal with this and let them keep the animals, that's always our first option.
Okay. If you love reptiles and care about reptile welfare, why not become a responsible reptile keeping member? From just £4 a month, you'll receive our free quarterly magazine and a window sticker to let everybody know that you support responsible reptile keeping. Our annual membership options offer even more benefits, including discounts, t-shirts and a whole lot more. To find out more, head on over to responsiblereptilekeeping.org. So we've talked about why there is a need for rescue and rehoming facilities, but we haven't really discussed how the NCRW came to be, and that's quite an interesting story, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was, I guess, one of those perfect storms. So there is a thing called the Pet Charity,
Yep.
which was set up by the Pet Care Trust many, many years ago. And it's to represent pets, although it hadn't really done very much. So I was asked whether I'd be a trustee of the Pet Charity. So I agreed foolishly. So I've been a member, and so I become a trustee in 2014, and we would meet 4 times a year, have a load of sandwiches, say how wonderful we were, and do bugger all. So come to 2016, I had made the decision that I was going to resign as a trustee because it was not doing anything. By chance, part of the pet industry, the Pet Charity, was a grooming school at Hadlow College. Now, I don't do dogs and cats. I have, I'm just baffled why anybody wants to keep a dog or a cat. I really am. And, I'm speaking with some authority. My mother was a mad cat lady, and so we had lots of cats at home when I was a child growing up, and every morning was a reenactment of the Battle of the Somme with dead, decapitated mammals all over the place.
Goodness, yeah.
So that sort of put why I didn't like cats. When my grandfather passed away, I inherited his Scottish deerhound, Ash, who I had for a couple of years before, thankfully, she snuffed it. And that confirmed why I didn't understand why anybody would ever want a dog, because it was just a pain in the arse. Pardon me. So I'm not a dog and cat person.
Yeah.
So it was, we want you to go down as a trustee, we want you to go down to the college and see our wonderful grooming school. I'm even more baffled why you want to shave your dogs. I've got to be honest. But so it's like, no, I really don't want to do this. This is no.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're going to, okay. There'll be a free lunch. Okay. Well, okay, there's a free lunch. Let's go and do that. So I came down to the college and looked around at our wonderful grooming school, which reaffirmed all my fears and why would anybody want a bloody dog, and then why do you want to shave the wretched thing after that? Anyway, so that was fine. And we then introduced to the principal of the college at the time. And I don't know why, I was probably not particularly... So we went out for a meal in the evening. So they took us out for a meal, and we were sat in the pub, where all the best things happen in the pub.
Of course.
And Mark said to me, well, what is it you're into, and what would you like to do? So I kind of said, well, reptiles and amphibians are my background, that's what I'm interested in. And really one of the things we've been working towards one day would be to have a rescue rehoming centre where we could do research and welfare and all this sort of stuff. And he said, well, that's a good idea, I like that. And he says, I've got a spare building, you can have it.
Goodness me.
Literally that. So he said, that's fine. He said, yeah. So have it. Free charge. We won't charge you utilities. Set it all up. Come and do it.
Goodness.
And it was like, that's then someone calling you bluff. All right. Because all of a sudden, this is a possibility.
Now you have to do something about it.
So, So we then had another meeting of the Pet Charity. And obviously they were aware of this because they'd been part of that process. So they said, well, actually, we think this is a really good idea. And we'll give you a budget of £70,000 to set it up.
Which sounds like a lot.
It sounds like a lot.
But when you start walking around the centre today, you can see that 70k would be a drop in the ocean. But we'll come to that. But 70k sounds like a lot?
It sounds like a lot, and I thought it was a lot of money and we could do everything. Then I started planning it out. Suddenly it became a reality, so I've now got to come up with a plan. So I then started putting all of that together. The air conditioning that we had to put into this building was 25,000 quid.
Oh, my life.
So you then suddenly realise, actually, this is nowhere near enough money.
Yeah.
And the Pet Charity is not wealthy, so it didn't have millions in the bank, so that was it.
So what happened next?
So at that time, Pets at Home were reviewing their whole policy with reptiles, and they'd decided to take reptiles out of quite a number of stores.
So Pets at Home are a big brand
Pets at
multi-chain
Home are the
store.
biggest chain of pet stores in the UK. They had 500 branches across the whole of the UK.
Gotcha.
And they'd had put reptiles into all of them, and they'd decided to take them out of quite a large number.
Was that take reptiles out completely, or
No,
just take
no,
the
no.
livestock out?
Oh, no, so not taking reptiles out completely. They just rethought through the number of stores that they need to have reptiles in.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a lot of them, they were taking reptiles out. Because
Gotcha.
I had helped them and been involved with them, they said, well, you can have all the equipment.
Now, that's a lot of equipment.
It was. So I think we need to put some context to this. So this whole conversation about setting up the centre started in 2016.
Yep.
So, and it was at 2016, 2017, that Pets at Home were realigning their offer on reptiles and taking reptile equipment out of their enclosures. All of these are Pets at Home enclosures here.
Yeah. And this is just a small
This is
small
just-
selection of what's in the centre. We'll do a walk around shortly and you'll see more.
So they then said we could have it. All we had to do is collect it. And
Which sounds nice, but then collecting that amount of equipment from all over the country?
well, so we couldn't do everything. And at this time, we didn't have this building. This actually building was, believe it or not, a school. And
Okay.
it was still operating as a school in 2016. So we were collecting. So I literally, so I went to the CITES conference in South Africa, Johannesburg, in 2016 to represent the reptile industry. I came back, I landed knackered after 2 weeks arguing with aunties and an 11-hour flight back to the UK to be greeted by Daniel on this bloody great big lorry and then say, oh yeah, we've got to go and pick some equipment up before we go home.
Daniel's your son.
Daniel's my son.
Yeah. Your long-suffering son, I should add.
Well, I don't know. I think he's probably equal measures. So he'd been collecting most of this stuff.
Yeah.
So our house looked like a depot for Pets at Home. Our back garden, our driveway, everything was just full of these things.
So he's driving around the country in this
Picking them up and just taking them
7.5
back.
ton lorry,
And picking them up, taking them home.
filling up your house with
Yeah,
reptile
everything,
equipment,
everything.
vivariums, thermostats, heat
The whole
mats,
lot.
backgrounds.
Yeah, the whole lot. So then we didn't actually get the keys to this place until June 2017.
So how long was that again that you were living within the...
It was probably 12 months of because it was a rolling process. They didn't take everything out overnight. It was a whole rolling process. There was probably nearly a 12-month period where we were driving around various parts of the country, picking up all this equipment, bringing it back and storing it at home. And it looked like Steptoe's yard. And then we got the keys to this place.
Yeah.
And the college had agreed that they would spend X amount of money converting it to our requirements. There was a very tight budget,
Yeah.
but they would help it. So I had to plan out how I wanted to lay things out, move rooms around, put walls in, take walls out, all that kind of thing. That I thought was going to... They said, oh, that'll take 3 months to do that. And then I said, well, it'll take us 3 months to get everything in place. So the plan was we would be completed by... Actually, I think it was about January of the following year. Nothing went to plan. So
Really?
colleges work on a different time scale. So they come in and do things and then bugger off and then go. So the whole thing was a nightmare in logistical terms of getting this done. But eventually we were getting there. We were starting to install the stuff and getting everything ready. And then the principal come to see me and he kind of said, I really want it open for the start of the academic year, which is September. So this is 2018.
I remember visiting at that point when you were just setting everything up. Do you remember?
Nothing was finished. It was a mess.
It was mayhem, and but were you not surrounded by loads of volunteers helping as well?
As always, the reptile community stood up. Everybody came in. We had work parties, ripping all the vivariums apart, cleaning them, setting it all up. I mean, it was a fun time, but a nightmare. It was a fun nightmare.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can describe it. So we started to get everything in, and by August we kind of had a lot in, but we were nowhere near finished. So I kind of said, no, we're not opening until everything's done and finished, and we haven't done the roof. We're still leaking. So Mark, sweet talked me into, so on perhaps the best date of all, 13th of August 2018, the very first animals arrived into the centre.
Say that again, the first animals arrived when?
13th of August 2018.
So that really is the date of opening, isn't it?
So that's the date of opening. We'd taken
And how ready were you at that point?
We were not.
Really?
Absolutely. And that's when actually the nightmare sunk in, because obviously not being the brightest person on the planet, I live in Southampton. This college is in Tunbridge Wells, just outside Tunbridge Wells in Kent,
Yeah.
110 miles away. So whilst we were in that construction period for a year, we were driving backwards and forwards, but we didn't have to do it every day. Okay, we come up 2 or 3 days' work. Sometimes we just stay locally in a cheap hotel or whatever, and then go back. But all of a sudden, you filled it with animals.
And now that you need it every day.
Then the realisation, bugger, someone's got to be here every day.
Yeah.
That's then when the realisation of what we'd started began sunk in. Now, I had a plan. I'd had a plan right from the beginning, how we would do it, and my role as a trustee would be oversight. So I'd come in, set it all up, put the management structure in, the infrastructure, get all our processes in place. Then I would step back and we would employ somebody to manage it.
So how's that working out for you, Chris?
Not to plan.
Not well.
Not well. Not well. It's a long and very sad and sorry story, but
Well, we'll come to that.
Yeah.
But
so I knew there would be 6 months
Yeah.
of having to travel backwards and forwards every day, and I was reconciled to that. And it's only 2 hours each way, so it wasn't that I could live with that. 6 months of that, that's fine.
okay.
Things didn't work out, and we can talk about that.
Yeah.
But that's how it all started.
So by this point, we've got a building.
Yep,
We've filled it with equipment,
we have.
and we'd received a handful of animals.
Not quite a handful.
Oh,
So it was,
okay.
so just before the centre opened, there was another issue with another rescue centre.
Okay.
Let's call it that. Was closed down. So we'd actually taken 120. We were asked by the local authority and actually by the organisation itself to take their animals. So we'd taken 122 animals.
That's not a handful.
It's quite a big handful.
That is quite a
It's quite
big
big.
handful.
No, but some of them were quite big. So they were at my home.
Yeah.
So, of course, once we'd opened 13th of August, everything came here.
Yeah.
So we had 122 animals to start with, and then quite quickly after that, more came in. So
Okay.
we were in.
Word is out. At that point, people start to know that the NCRW exists and there's animals incoming. How do they get here? How do those animals get here?
So,
Because we're a national organisation. It's not just
Yep.
a local organisation.
yeah. So again, this is where the reptile industry is always so wonderful. So we actually have about 100 drop-off points around the UK.
Check that out.
So by arrangement, if you've got an animal and you live in Edinburgh,
Yeah.
for example, and you've got a turtle that you want us to take, you contact us. We can then put in an arrangement for you to drop it off a local pet shop in that area, and then Monkfield or Peregrine will actually transport that animal back to us.
Monkfield and Peregrine are the big reptile
Those are the two big
wholesale
ones, yeah.
companies,
So-
and they deliver to stores
Yep.
every day,
Yep.
all
Well,
over
not-
the country.
Yeah, so they have their own van networks and they deliver right up to, so we can cover from sort of, we can't go Land's End to John O'Groats, but pretty much Land's End, and then we really, the furthest we can go up at the moment is about Edinburgh.
So as long as you can get your
Glasgow.
animal to Edinburgh,
Yep. Or Glasgow.
then
Yep.
then we can help.
Yeah.
That's quite an astounding achievement, given the number of reptiles that are kept in the UK, and given the distribution of animals that come into the centre. To be able to drop off at so many different drop-off points has got to be a useful, if not somewhat complicated, logistical process. How else would it have worked?
But you couldn't do it. So we have a vehicle, Support Adoption, which is a charity that supports other charities, provided us with a brand new vehicle. So we do a collection network as well.
That's
but
cool.
But that's really difficult to cover the whole of UK with one vehicle and no
Yeah.
staff to drive it. So it's only myself or Daniel, my son, who can drive.
So you'll collect animals that are within a radius of the centre, but beyond that, it's delivery to one of the drop-off points.
There are occasions where the animal wouldn't be appropriate for somebody to drop off.
Oh, I see.
So we deal with it. So my foundation idea with this is we would have a facility to deal with any reptile or amphibian that might need a homing.
Okay.
And that includes up to crocodiles. and venomous snakes and all the rest of it.
And
So,
have you had much intake of crocs and venomous?
we had 7 crocodiles. So far.
Cool. Which ones?
We had 5 spectacle caiman and 2 dwarf caiman, and we're just dealing with the Morlitz crocodile at the moment.
No, that's not a usual kind of animal to be dealing with.
No, I can't go into the background too much on that one, but again, we work with all the authorities. This is one that had been held for a long period of time.
Yeah.
He was sort of on death row because they couldn't find a home for him, so they asked us whether we would take him, and I said, well, we can't take him, but I'm sure I can find him a home.
Yeah.
It took us about 6 months to find him a home.
Really?
Yeah. So
Did,
he's about 7-8 foot, so and not entirely friendly.
That's not a small animal to rehome, is it?
No, it's not. So, but we sorted it. He's off to his new home.
That's cool.
So,
How about in terms of venomous then? What's
we've had king cobras, the normal run-of-the-mill stuff.
let's just say that sentence again, Chris. You've had king cobras, normal run-of-the-mill stuff. I don't think those two sentences go together in my world, but
I live in a very odd world.
what else have you had venomous-wise?
So there was a situation local to here where a gentleman got bitten by his pet Indian cobra,
Oh, lovely.
and he was in a coma.
That stings, doesn't it?
Probably. So we were contacted by the police. We would go and deal with that. So that was fairly local to here, and that was a whole bunch of reasonably unfriendly, uncivil critters. Because I hate spitting cobras. There's quite a lot of spitting cobras and rattlesnakes and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So we had to go and remove those. Venomous we don't keep. We have a venomous room. But like anything, our plan is not to keep animals. This is a rehoming centre. If an animal comes in, our intention is to find it a new home. With the venomous, we already have various agreements with places that will take them, so they'll only be here for a limited period of time
That's
before
good.
they move on. Brexit hasn't helped us with that because
In what respect?
well, because there was a big venom institute in Paris that would take the animals, and now actually moving. We used to take animals in from across the whole of the EU as well. We had quite a lot of stuff from different authorities across the EU coming to us at times, but that's all stopped now because moving animals backwards and forwards is
It's become logistically
it's a
problematic,
logistic
hasn't
nightmare.
it? Yeah.
So we're slightly on tenterhooks at the moment. There are various institutions here that do research, so at the moment we are okay, but rehoming venomous is going to be a challenge for us.
That was always going to be a challenge, but at least we have a network and a kind of a circle of people that we know.
I think the advantage that the centre has is because it's so deeply involved with the hobby and the industry. You know everybody.
There's nobody you don't know.
There's, I wouldn't say there's nobody. We have a lot of networking going on.
Yeah.
So something comes in, something rare, unusual comes in, even venomous. We'll find a home for it.
And that's something that I'd say more generic charities won't have the option of doing, is it? Because they are more generic and they have more traditional pet networks.
Well, I think a lot of the charities, and there's only one really that deals with reptiles. They're hostile to reptile keeping.
Yeah.
So they don't necessarily have a
The
really
best interest.
wide network into the reptile world.
Yeah.
They will have a few people they know, but lots of people are opposed to that because of the stance.
Yeah.
So we're very fortunate that if we don't know somebody will know somebody, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
when I need something special rehomed, then we can always find a way to do that.
So we can move animals around the country, but what happens when they get here?
Okay, so we have quite a rigid process. So every animal that arrives is documented. So there's a form for rehoming and there's a form for rescues where we capture as much data as we can.
Let's look at that for a moment. So you said there's one form for rescues and one form for rehoming, and I know you've touched on it briefly, but it was important to us to get a distinction between the two.
For me, there was an importance to have a distinction between the two. So
Why?
because everything gets called a rescue, and this is a motive argument that all these animals that need rescuing every year,
So badly treated,
they're in
let
poor
out into the
condition,
wild.
all the rest of it. So that's what I wanted to separate out. Let's have the rescue and the rehoming, and then let's capture all the data on that animal. What condition is that animal in? Okay, is it in good condition? Body score it. What are the medical issues with it? What problems do we have? Where was it acquired from? That was an important one. Was it got from a pet shop? Was it from a breeder? Where
What
did you get the
difference
animal?
does that make?
It's just understanding. So a lot of this probably at the moment doesn't necessarily make any difference. What I wanted to look at, so we talk a lot about irresponsible sales on the internet. Okay, so that's one of the big things. The
It's a
internet
big talking point,
it
isn't
is a
it?
huge talking point. So I wanted to go, okay, how many animals do we get in acquired
Sourced from the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And bizarrely, the answer is very few.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So what that data tells us, I don't know. And sometimes you collect data and you don't necessarily know why you're collecting it, but hopefully at some point it all starts to make sense. What I really wanted to do with this is actually see this as a benefit for the reptile hobby and the reptile trade.
How so?
Well, I said earlier, we are part of the problem. We keep animals, and as a consequence of keeping animals, there will be a negative side to that.
But that's true of
But that's-
all incidents.
Absolutely.
Whether you're a car owner, there's a
Yep.
negative side to that. Whether you're a house builder, there's a negative side to that. So, am I right in thinking that what you're saying is that we understand that as the pet trade and pet hobbyists, there will be some unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And if we can take care of those issues, then that helps to make sure the animals have high welfare, looked after, etc., etc.
So it's not about denying there's problems. Are there problems with the reptile hobby?
Inevitably.
Yes. Are there problems with the reptile trade?
Inevitably.
Yes. So rather than trying to hide that, let's understand what those problems are, and can we put something in place to deal with it. So if we step back from that, if we look what Repta was doing. So if we go back to the early part of the 2000s, green iguanas were a massive problem.
Yes,
Okay.
weren't they just?
Every, quote, rescue centre, every zoo was full up with green iguanas, and it was a really negative.
How many green iguanas were they bringing in at that point? 'Cause I remember you had figures at one
Yeah,
point.
so about 20,000 a year.
20,000
green iguanas were imported.
6-inch long
Yeah.
little
And of course,
baby dragons.
my argument is that green iguanas can make absolutely fantastic pets. And I'm surprised, actually, Aphrodite hasn't made her presence known here. She wanders
She's
around.
the local green iguana walking around somewhere, isn't she?
Well, she's a red green iguana. So
Is that
she's
right?
A bit confused with life. But they can make fantastic pets.
Yeah.
As long as you know what you're taking on and how big it's going to get.
But that's true of every pet, isn't it?
Absolutely. But the pet industry hasn't always done the right thing. And they were sold inappropriately. Let's just be honest. They were.
That was back in the 80s and 90s mostly?
Yeah, mostly in the 90s. They were. I'm not going to, I don't defend the indefensible. Some of what we have done is wrong. So, but the mass trade in baby green iguanas was wrong. The
bad idea.
mass trade and continuing mass trade in baby turtles is equally unhelpful.
Just to visit the iguana issue.
But if we go back to the iguana, 20,000 a year, there was problems. We engaged with the reptile industry and particularly with the importers to try to say, actually, perhaps what we need to do is reduce the numbers of green iguanas we imported and work on other species. Things
Why?
like bearded dragons. Let's try and trade more appropriate pets.
And I think from a trade perspective, even if you look at it from a hard-nosed kind of pet trade perspective, if my first lizard was a green iguana and then it grows into this little monster that scratches, is difficult to keep, needs a huge enclosure and has a very complex diet and lots of ultraviolet light needs, etc., that's probably not a great initiation into the hobby. And at some point I'm going to say, well, this
Absolutely.
is a terrible hobby, I don't want anything to do with it anymore.
Absolutely. And that was
Whereas
it.
if we have a bearded dragon,
And that was the argument. So it's having been involved in the industry and understanding the business, it allowed me to be able to try to put forward cogent arguments of why perhaps some of this is not appropriate, or we could change our ways, do things differently.
for everybody's benefit.
And it benefits everybody, and the reptile trade has grown massively, and part of that is us, not me obviously, but part of that is trying to help give the right information and make the trade mature. There were things wrong we were doing. Agama, red-headed agamas.
Yeah.
Again, that was another species back in the 80s and 90s that we
Yeah.
were trading in them, which is not appropriate species because it wouldn't survive. It didn't survive in captivity at that time.
Yeah.
So trying to help educate the industry, make arguments, put plans in place, let's try and change these things. So then we went from 20,000 green iguanas a year to about 500 green iguanas a
They've
year.
been very receptive to those messages.
That's why I'm so supportive. The whole reptile world is, whether it's the hobby or it's the trade. If you can make a good argument without lecturing them and telling them you're wrong, and they possibly listen to somebody who's been involved in it a little bit more than they would somebody who has no knowledge,
Yeah.
they will change. Not everyone. We still,
There are
there were still bad importers. That's all changed. So today, the reptile hobby and trade is a completely different beast to what it was 20 years or 30 years ago.
And the data that you're collecting here helps us to inform the trade and inform the hobby so
Absolutely.
that we have better welfare, better trade, fewer problems.
Absolutely. So if we the reason for that, if we can spot a trend, can we see something emerging? Okay, if we can see something emerging, maybe we can address it and stop it becoming a major problem. So that was the whole.
That's the reason for collecting data.
Data is king.
And did we not already have that data from other organisations? Why?
So because they're not involved in the industry, how would they get that data? How would they know? So if you're opposed to something, attack is much easier than defence. So you can make as many allegations as you want, and then the industry's got to defend itself, but it's got nothing to defend it with.
Didn't have any data to work with.
So we didn't. So now that was the whole point. Data, collect all of this. Okay. Some of it won't be relevant, much of it will. And you never know what is going to be important. But for me, the more data we've got, and that's paid absolute dividends now with government, because now when we go back to the table,
we can say, actually.
Yeah. So rather than an speculation, accusation,
you
can say, well, here's the evidence. This is what our data shows. And we can produce all of this in great detail. And if another organisation says, we disagree with that, it's okay.
Where's your data?
Show us your facts. And it's, we think, we believe, it's estimated, but it's true. and so now government listens a lot more than it did before.
That's great news.
It's not perfect. I mean, we've gone through the last couple of years with a very difficult government who's not pro-exotic pet trade at all. And we've had a really difficult time with that for the last 2 or 3 years. That's beginning to change.
That's good news.
We've now got a government. So I'm apolitical. I've never voted, so I don't have a team that I back. But we've now got a government. Whilst I'm not impressed with lots of other stuff, I'm more impressed they're listening. What they're listening to is what they say is what we want: facts, data. Show us the evidence, and that's whether you want to ban something or support something. So we can now say, okay, well, reptile rescuing, rehoming, this is our data. That's it.
That's very good news. Following the journey of the animal that comes in, it comes through the door, and the first port of call is paperwork, so that we can collect data.
So the first port of call is the paperwork, and data, that's the really important thing.
Yeah.
The animal then gets issued a number. A unique reference number. So we
See,
can trace
that's not the experience that I've had since I've come here. Every animal that I know that comes in here is issued with a name. You might not. Yeah.
Don't talk about my volunteers, because I just have a trend to become a homicidal maniac and murder them all, because they give everything a name. So if it house rules, if it has a name, it comes in with that name and it keeps that name.
Good.
House rule.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have a name,
they give it one.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful.
But it drives me nuts, because
Toby and
Kira come in and say, "Oh, we've got Fred. He's not doing well," or Harry. And it's like, who the bloody hell's Fred or Harry? What's his number? So they don't know the numbers. I don't know the name. So we have quite a lot of rows. So everybody gets issued an identity card.
Yeah.
That tracks them through. So you do your paperwork. You're given your number. You then go to the triage room.
I want to come back to the volunteers, because every time I've come in here, you've been giving the volunteers abuse, and they all seem to smile and love it and get on with doing their job. And, talking about volunteers, here's another...
Four-legged volunteer.
We're being invaded by another tortoise. Hi. And anyway, without the volunteers, I should really stress, I don't think you'd be able to run this place very well.
Without the students and without the volunteers, this place would never succeed. I mean, they are the backbone to it. They are what make it work.
Yep.
So the agreement when we came here was the college gave us the building. We don't pay rent, and we didn't pay utility costs, which is a massive bonus.
Isn't it just, yeah.
And then we get free slave labour. So students can come here either just as general volunteers, or they can do the work placement. So if you're doing if you're doing a degree, part of that you'll have to do X number of formal work placement hours.
Yeah.
So you can come here and you can
Fulfill those hours.
You can fulfill those hours here.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have other students who will be coming here to do research.
Yeah.
So research on husbandry and welfare is a key part of what we're doing as well. So it's rescue, rehoming, research.
I'd like to cover the research in more detail, actually, but before we do that, we've been here since about 9 o'clock this morning and setting up and getting things ready. It's coming up to 1 o'clock now, and we've had a handful of volunteers here. One of them was Toby.
So we've got Toby, Kira, and Alex in at the moment, and we'll have some more later on.
So those guys came in and been working their asses off, getting stuff cleaned out, getting the husbandry work done.
Yep.
They've gone off to collect what, sorry?
They haven't gone off to collect. So we had 14 giant Burmese brown tortoises come in, which are pretty rare.
Yeah.
So they've gone off to a zoological collection. I was supposed to drive them up today, but I couldn't do that. So the volunteers have loaded them up in the car and buggered off to go and deliver them.
What would you do without them?
We couldn't survive. Because no one's paid. I don't get paid. Everyone's a volunteer here, and I can't do everything.
Yeah.
Without them, this place would not succeed. And it's just astonishing. We have they're just brilliant. Not that I'll say that to them personally. Right?
Of course, I've seen you rule with an iron fist, which is actually a bit soggy, if I'm honest, because they just tend to get on with the job, regardless of your interference.
They just ignore me and tell me what to do. They're brilliant. They're absolute stars. And a lesson I learned in life is actually teamwork, which wasn't my history at all.
Yeah.
But teamwork. And so you get these guys come in. So Kira was a former student here. She's completed her course. She still comes back.
Yeah.
Toby, he's still at school, but actually he's going to be a student here next year, which is very depressing because I'll see even more of him. He's not aesthetically pleasing. You've got to be honest. And the thought I'm going to have him every school holiday. He's here every day. So if he's not at school, he's here.
Good.
And he's brilliant. And he's learnt. And what I like about this, so part of our process here is we empower them to make decisions.
That's interesting.
So once I'm confident that they know what they're doing. And he's only 15, but he's been keeping reptiles for a long time. He knows what he's doing.
Good boy.
I don't need to tell him. Kira knows what she's doing. So they're empowered to make their own decisions. They will move animals around. They will tell me what they've done, but they don't ask permission to do it. And that's the rule here. Once you're part of the team, you're empowered to make decisions and do things. So we actually make them part of the team rather than feel that they're working here, that they're coming in for instructions and the rest of it.
That's exceptional, because it would be quite easy for you to maintain in complete control and micromanage them, but you've got better things to do,
I don't need to micromanage them. So, we will discuss about things and they will come and ask, what do you want done or things like that. But they're empowered to make decisions. They know what needs to be done. They don't need to. They'll come in quite often. I'm sat at the desk on paper, but they don't. They just come in, hurl some abuse, and then I'll see them a few hours later because they know exactly what to do.
Well, if this miserable old sod doesn't tell you that you're doing a great job, I think we'll acknowledge that here and now. So thank you, guys. If you're volunteering here or if you have volunteered here, thank you so much, because like Chris says, I don't think this place would run without you.
They're stars.
That's great news. What do we do next then? Let's look at what happens to the animals. So we've talked about how they get here. They get deposited at one of the centres, collection centres that are around the country. They're transported here by one of the UK's big reptile wholesalers. They arrive, they get their admin paperwork done, and then they come under the care of the volunteers who give them their husbandry needs thereafter.
Well, so the first thing, that every animal is triaged. Okay.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that.
So every animal goes into the triage room, it's photographed, weighed, examined.
Yeah.
Quite often I will do that. So if it's an animal, if it's a Royal Python that's in perfect health, they're quite capable of doing that. If they've got any issues or concerns or something they're not sure about, then they'll get me.
And how often do you see that? How often do you see animals that need medical, veterinary, specialist care beyond, this is a great animal, put it in a normal viv and everything's okay?
So up until this year, it was fairly uncommon.
Mm-hmm. And what were you seeing?
So things that we expected to see, we were told that MBD was absolutely rampant.
Metabolic bone disease.
Well, metabolic bone disorder is it's
caused
called now.
by,
Inappropriate husbandry.
such as.
So not enough vitamin supplementation, not enough UV lighting.
Yeah.
So bearded dragons, according to others, 90% of bearded dragons have got MBD.
Is that true?
No. I would say 95% of what we see. Now, I have to be very careful here, and this is where we have a bit of a disparity with the veterinary world.
Mm-hmm.
The veterinary world is still, well, no, we see lots of MBD.
That's because they're vets.
That's because you're vets, and they
They
won't
don't see
accept
healthy
that.
animals.
We see healthy animals, and
Yeah.
we see greater numbers of animals than anybody else.
Hmm.
1,935 animals so far this year.
Goodness me.
So over 5,500 animals. So we see lots of animals, and I would say 90% of bearded dragons that we see do not have.
Metabolic bone disease.
That is observable. Now, where you can, I'm not a vet,
Good
okay.
point, yeah.
So then some of the vets will say yes, but you can't necessarily see metabolic bone disorder, and if it's only minor.
Yeah.
So we again, if you look at our document, it's MBD.
Observable.
Is it MBD or is it chronic?
Yeah.
So is it observable or is it really bad?
Yeah.
Really bad is incredibly rare for us
Goodness
to see.
me.
We actually see more MBD now in leopard geckos and crested geckos than we see in bearded dragons.
How come?
Well, again, because probably the supplementation and UV lighting was inappropriate in those.
But why specific to leopard geckos and cresties?
Probably because the argument is that they don't actually need UV lighting and supplementation or UV
That's an
lighting.
interesting argument that we should discuss in more detail. At another
It
day,
is, because
but
my personal view has changed on that.
That's interesting.
Well, it has. So originally, I was of the view that if you looked after your leopard geckos correctly, you didn't need UV lighting.
Okay.
And I've argued that for many years. I've now come to the conclusion, actually, that's wrong. That if you provide low-level UVB, that actually safeguards against not using supplementation properly. So if you're not doing one thing properly, then you can create this other problem.
It's a belt and braces approach to negate.
But this is what this is about. Nothing, from my point of view, it's all about data, learning. If you learn, if it's all about knowledge, and you can change your mind, So I would now, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would not have recommended that UVB was necessary for leopard geckos.
Yeah.
Today I would argue that it's highly beneficial.
Yeah.
I'm choosing my words carefully because you have to be careful how you put this. Because again, if you're looking after your geckos properly, you're supplementing them properly, probably
Maybe
they're
you
absolutely
don't.
fine.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't. But why not give them it? If it is going to be, as long as it's not going to be a negative, why not?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's changed. And that's my whole view about this is learning and changing and disseminating that information.
But that's an issue we've had with people who are against reptile keeping, is that despite what we know, despite the evidence that we have, despite what we're learning, despite the progression that's being made, they're not changing their position based on the most up-to-date evidence.
If you're fundamentally opposed to something, evidence is the last thing you want.
Good point, well made.
It's as simple as that. For me, we do. It is all about acknowledging that we can do better, we can improve, and it's all about improvement. And it's baby steps. We can't change. You will not make the world perfect overnight. You will never actually make the world perfect. But what we can do is make it a little bit better. So let's make next year a little bit better.
Just nudge everybody up just a little bit.
Absolutely. So rather than lecturing people, the last 2 or 3 years, the big argument is about snakes must be able to lay out stretch.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a really big thing that's been going on.
Yeah.
Evidence, data. Well, we have none from the keeping side. So you can make as many allegations as you want from the anti-keeping side, and you've got nothing
We
to do.
don't have anything to refute
So
with.
if you come to Hadlow College to do a BSc, a degree, part of that is you will have to do a dissertation.
Yeah.
And a dissertation is actually quite a robust scientific process, so you've got to look at something. So 2 examples that are relevant to this is we had a student that wanted to look at enrichment. So it wasn't enclosure sizes as such, it was for corn snakes an enriched environment as opposed to an unenriched environment, which created higher levels of activity.
Yeah.
With the assumption that high levels of activity are positive.
Good point.
May not be the case, but let's make that as our hypothesis that activity is good. So with these enclosures, we can fit cameras. So we had corn snakes in enriched environments, and we had corn snakes in unenriched environments.
What was the difference?
With cameras recording 24/7. So you could actually see what the snakes were doing. And then you create what's called an ethogram, which is you then go through that painstakingly, going through that. How often is the snake moving? How often is it drinking? How often is it doing whatever?
Yeah.
How often is it laying outstretched?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you get your conclusions and your results from that. So they didn't.
They didn't lay out stretched,
They didn't lay outstretched.
even though they had the opportunity.
They had the opportunity to do it. So most of the time they were coiled or semi-coiled or doing things. Or three, about the most that they really wanted, we observed doing was about 3/4 laying outstretched.
We've been invaded again.
Now that's ASBO.
That's Asbo.
That's ASBO. That's why she's on tag.
Oh, let me
because
go to Asbo. 1 second. What does Asbo weigh?
she's about 7 kilos.
So
She's a big male.
this is Asbo, and I'll show you. She's got a tag.
Yeah,
Can you
she's
see
on
that
tag.
tag on her back end?
She's a delinquent.
Because she keeps disappearing.
Yep.
There you go, Asbo.
Now she knows we're here. I'm afraid she will be a
Yeah,
pain.
invading. So the other bit of research that I heard about was our friend Monty.
So Monty was another one of our students, and who's also a volunteer. So he was a student. He came here to do his work placement, and now he's sort of resident, although he's gone off to another university to continue his studies. So his study last year was his dissertation was on reticulated pythons.
Yeah.
So he wanted to do this. So that was a challenge.
Retics are big animals.
Retics are big animals. So it was looking at how often they lay outstretched.
Yeah.
So we approached a number of zoos in the country. So most zoos, the enclosure for the reticulated python is much bigger than a snake.
Good point.
So we selected a few of those, including London Zoo, and asked them whether we could put these cameras into those enclosures to record how often the snakes, well, they're general, so it isn't just looking at them laying out straight, it's what their activity levels are, what they do, how often they do it, and all the rest of it. So we did that. I think there were 6 institutions that allowed us to put cameras in and record it for a month, and then Monty analysed that. And again, at no point did a reticulated python lay outstretched asleep. 1 or 2 occasionally went fairly linear.
i.e.
in
not
movement.
coiled.
Not coiled, so
Yeah.
fairly moving around. But the amount of, so in terms of laying outstretched, i.e. resting outstretched, they did not do. Some of them would move more or less in a straight line. So, but even that's probably only about 95%, 95% actually in a straight line.
And I don't recall seeing any snakes lying rectilinearly
No.
in the wild.
Well, again, I spend a lot of time in the wild. I've not seen that. What we do see, so with big-bodied vipers like puff adders, they will move in a
In a
rectilinear
straight line,
motion,
yeah.
and so will big-bodied snakes if
Yeah.
they can.
If
If there's a
they're
big
moving.
outsized area, they will use that because it's a more efficient method of locomotion
Yeah.
than normal serpentine. But there isn't any evidence that we can see at the moment that suggests there is any health benefits from the snake being able to be laid outstretched, nor is there a desire for them to do it from what we can see with the data at the moment. Still early days, it's only 2 studies, so
Yeah.
we can't make a conclusion from that. But this is the beauty of it. Then we will have more students going through over the years doing dissertations, and this will become more and more part of that. What we started here by using cameras to record, video cameras to record 24/7 and allow animals, and then for you to analyse that is really interesting because the behaviour at night is very different to it is during the day.
Yeah.
Often you're observing that. So more as we go progress through years, we'll have more and more information, and maybe that data will come forward at some point that we can demonstrate that there is a welfare benefit from a snake being able to lay outstretched. We don't have that data at the moment. So we'll see. But we don't have any data that shows that it's
The other side,
detrimental.
yeah.
So lots of these things we're learning, and that's the beauty of it. For me, it's all about learning.
So back to data collecting then. So you collect data to try to preempt problems and address them before they become bigger problems. The best time to kill a monster is while it's small.
Yeah.
So what kind of monsters have we been finding? What kind of problems have you experienced and identified since NCRW has been doing its thing?
The single biggest issue, the single biggest problem we have is boa constrictors.
Boa constrictors.
Yeah.
Tell me why that's a problem.
So, I'm understanding why they're the problem. I don't have an answer to in terms of that's not the number one species that comes in by any means.
Comes in as in imported?
No, it comes in as a rescue or a
Oh,
rehome.
comes in through the door.
Comes in through
I
the
see.
door. It's not the biggest number by far, but it's by far the lowest number going out of the door. People
Goodness.
do not want to rehome them.
Why
And
do you think that is?
I don't know. I mean, so for me, it's baffled me. We thought reticulated pythons were going to be a real issue.
Mm-hmm.
They've been a non-issue up until this year.
When you say they're a non-issue, you mean they're a non-issue because they don't come in, or a non-issue because they go out just as quickly?
Both. So they come in, small numbers, they go
Yeah.
out, small numbers.
Okay.
Not a problem. Burmese pythons, likewise, not a problem.
And to be clear, reticulated pythons are far, far bigger than a typical boa.
Yeah. So I thought retics were going to be our biggest problem. I'm quite, how do I put this? I've been very vocal on the mass breeding of reticulated pythons. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes the hobby's ever made.
How many retics do you have on site right now?
I think I've got 6 at the moment.
This is retics?
Yeah.
How many boas do you have on site?
30.
How long have they been here?
Some of those have been here 2 years.
Goodness. And they're just not going
I
anywhere.
can't rehome them. No one wants them.
It's an interesting one because I don't know too many people who keep them, and I don't know too many people who breed them. Are they still being bred? Or are these left over from the 90s and 2000s?
Lots of these are young.
Young boas?
Yeah. So
Okay.
2 to 3 years. We see them at 2 to 3 years, and then we see them at sort of 8 years plus. It's quite interesting demographics. of
Okay.
that. If it's small and pretty,
Somebody will want it.
we have half a chance of rehoming it. If it's a big normal, and it's aggressive, as some of them are because they haven't been handled. We had one that somebody helped me with. There are some lovely people. So a guy come to me, he wanted a boa constrictor, and he came to see us and we talked about it, and he said, I want the one you've had the longest. I don't care what it looks like.
Yeah.
I used to keep snakes. I've got a little bit of money behind me now. And the facility you built was absolutely fantastic. He said, I just want to give one a second chance. I just want the one you've had longest. And that was one we've had for 3 years.
Yeah.
And it was a bugger.
And he took it on and
He took it on.
How
but
wonderful.
that is wonderful. Absolutely. Yeah. But that's the rarity.
Rare, isn't it? Yeah.
I've got 6 here that are 8 foot and will eat you.
Well, let's look at this in comparison to the turtle issue, because I know that was another big issue that was facing the trade and the hobby and NCRW in particular. What I'd like to do is look at what you did about turtles and what might happen in terms of boas then. Is there no way you can replicate the success you've had with turtles with boas? Let's talk about what happened with turtles for a start.
So I recognised turtles were going to be a problem a long time ago. So back in about 2005, 2006, I set up Team Turtle. So again, what I like to do if we're going to address an issue is, I'm not an expert. I know a bit about lots of things, a little bit. I'm not an expert. So if we're going to deal with a problem, I surround myself by all the best experts I can find. So when we were going to do the turtles, I got my turtle experts together, and I got the reptile industry together to what is the problem and what can we do to resolve this. What we learned very quickly is turtles are not actually a reptile trade problem.
That's interesting.
They're brought in by the aquatics trade.
Am I right in remembering that there was a moratorium for a while on things like red ears?
No, so that was my plan. So what I put forward, so I got all the people together from all sides. So a lot of the turtle keeping sort of turtle experts not necessarily terribly supportive of trade, okay, for reasons I completely understand. I kind of say, look, you need to put that behind you. If you want to be part of this, let's all just be out and accept there is a trade. How can we make it better? And they did that. And we had several meetings, and we could do bugger all, because what we couldn't affect was the importers. So I could talk to the traders, the reptile trade, and try to pull that back.
And they were receptive to that.
They were receptive to that, but they weren't the problem. The aquatics trade were bringing in the turtles in huge numbers and selling them off. So most turtles, 95% of turtles imported into the UK coming in through the aquatic trade, 95% of turtles sold are sold through aquatic stores with fish. And for whatever reasons, they were very different to the reptile trade. They were not willing to engage.
They bring in large quantities and work on small margins. And
so Team Turtle failed after 2 years because there was nothing I could do. There was nothing we could do. Sorry, not me. There was nothing that could be done. It was just going to be what it would be. And I knew where it was going to go because I work a lot with UK government. At that time, I was working a lot with EU government, EU Commission. So we knew there was going to be an invasive species legislation coming through. And I knew turtles, red-eared sliders, and that were going to be on it. Now, red-eared sliders were imported back, banned from importation into the EU back in about, I think it was 1997. However, you could import yellow-bellied turtles. So it's a separate subspecies.
Yeah.
Like what genius came up with that?
Yeah.
So the trade moved from red ears to yellow-bellies. And that went through until 2018, I think, when they were finally banned.
Yeah.
And now we're just moving into other species. So we're bringing in things like river cooters, which are actually even
bigger, aren't they?
Even bigger and more of a problem. So there was nothing we could do with that. So I'm still... Okay, it was a big stick, the whole reptile, and it was the reptile industry getting beaten with a stick unfairly because it's not our problem.
So what was happening, just to recap, was they get brought in when they're about the size of a 50p piece, and they're very cute, and they can live in a small enclosure. And then a year later, the size of a small dinner plate, need mass filtration, lots of UV, a diet that makes them make a lot of smelly poo, a lot of cleaning out, a lot of smell. And what happens to them then?
So... Again, we have to be careful with it. So that is absolutely correct. And at that point, a lot of people will get rid of them.
Get rid of them how?
Well, that's the question. So, and this is, for me, was the problem. Where do they go? Well, the only thing they can do for a lot of people is actually release it.
How so? Why wouldn't you bring it here?
Well, so we didn't exist. So my first project, as we were setting the centre up, was to say, from what I could see at that point in time, the single biggest issue the pet industry had was the mass importation of baby turtles, and all these vast numbers of baby turtles needing to be rehomed and nobody to deal with it. So I said we should deal with that.
And there was legislation to stop rehoming centres taking them in, is that correct?
So we have the EU invasive species regulations that came in 2018, and that basically at that point stopped them doing that. So that was a really problematic situation. It's changed slightly, but it's a real mess at the moment. And actually the legislation, I argued very strongly with the EU, and the penny didn't drop with them until it was too late. I said, what are you going to understand? So invasive species legislation is looking at all invasives, which are mostly plants and things like that, as well as... But my argument, I said, if you're dealing with a pet species, you have to think really carefully how you're dealing with that. Because what you're talking... And if you look at the legislation, it uses this word, transported to a place of humane eradication.
Yeah.
Right? I said to people, if they've had their turtle, it's part of their family. Their circumstance, whatever the circumstances are that's forcing them to find a new home for it, maybe they're bored with it, but that may be it may be legitimate. They are not going to have that animal put down.
Yeah.
Okay. What are they going to do with it? And it took them a long time for the penny to drop.
To realise that the legislation was going to perpetuate the problem
so
they were
the
trying to avoid.
legislation is creating a bigger problem because you're now forcing people to actually release these turtles. Because there's no other options for them.
Because rescue and rehoming centres couldn't take them in because they couldn't rehome them out afterwards.
So then you have to be licensed to keep them. So we're licensed to keep them.
Yeah.
Well, who wants to do that? And it's a nightmare, and they've got to do all this paperwork.
Yeah.
There's probably 2 or 3 centres. So at that point, I made a proposal that we needed to do it, and I had some plans together. I was very fortunate. Lincolnshire Wildlife Park stepped up, and they created the National Turtle Sanctuary. So they're helping us, but their numbers are limited into what they can take. It's a much bigger problem. So what I'm trying to do, again, I've got these 100 drop-off points. So if you've got a turtle, I want you to contact us and we'll find a way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
Now,
That doesn't involve euthanizing that
doesn't
animal.
involve euthanizing the animal.
Yeah.
Turtles are actually quite relatively simple to deal with. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Because they're so hardy and can live outdoors.
they can live outdoors.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't know the mortality rate yet in terms of animals that are released, how many survive, but we know Turtle Tally, which is a project that's
I wanted
done by,
to talk about this, yeah.
we can talk about Turtle Tally. Turtle Tally is really important. Susie Simpson started that.
Yeah.
And she's one of the lecturers here at the college,
Yeah.
and that is mapping out across the whole of the UK where these turtles are actually living and trying to get numbers to them.
Population survey.
Density.
Yeah.
So what I want to stop is people releasing them.
Yeah. So if they come to you via one of the drop-off centres, we'll find somewhere where we can make sure they can live out their life.
So it's a challenge. So what we've done, our own first one, we are just waiting to get the license issued so I can move the turtles from here to there. Basically, you can dig a pond. So it's very difficult to use. There are reasons why you can't use an existing pond, or potentially it might have great crested newts in it, or newts, or
Good
other
point,
biodiversity. So actually releasing turtles into an established pond, lake, is actually problematic because you'd have to go through lots of surveys. But if you're in the right place, 4,000 or 5,000 quid,
Dig a hole.
a large hole was dug, and
Yeah.
it's pretty big, a football pitch, no, not half a football pitch, and then you have to put a barrier around so the turtles can't
That's
get
a
out.
lot of turtle.
So it will hold between 500 and 600 animals, and to do that has cost 500 quid, £5,000.
Yeah.
Okay, which
Which isn't a lot, but it's not
grand scheme,
insubstantial.
it's no. Well, if you haven't got £5,000's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But those we could do, and that's our plan. How we encourage and we're trying to encourage other places. Raisted, which is another rescue recentre down near Brighton.
Okay.
They've actually just gone through the process of actually using existing ponds, but they had lots of carp in it, so it was a much simpler process for them to do that. But they'll be able to take some. We've got one up in Lincolnshire. Okay. They're doing their own, and I'm trying to engage with others to look at this as solutions, because actually they make really good attractions, because actually the turtles are very interactive, so people like to go and see them and feed them. So we're trying to get zoos. It doesn't have to be, our first facility is quite large. We could have lots of little facilities or great big facilities, but it's a process, and that's what I want to get done, and that's how I view, again, pet industry is part of the problem. Let's try and be part of that solution.
And to be clear, turtles aren't invasive in the UK, are they?
Well, so this is part of Susie's research.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're obstructed all the way around now by this piece of legislation. We're trying to get permission. So we know turtles will survive in this country.
Will survive.
Yeah. Okay. Live.
Yeah.
For a number of years.
Yeah.
We've got turtles that we know have been living. The same turtles been living in the same pond for a protracted period of time.
Yeah.
A decade or more.
Yeah.
So they will live outside. Not all of them. We don't know how many die. We don't know how many live. But numbers live. We know they will reproduce, i.e. mate.
Yeah.
We know they will nest and they will lay eggs.
Yeah.
What we don't have any evidence yet is to suggest that those eggs will actually go full term, hatch, and the animals produce viable offspring.
Yeah.
Now there's lots of anecdotal stuff about people finding eggs that are broken and then a baby turtle, and the assumption is that's that. The evidence, the scientific evidence, is probably our temperatures are not high enough yet. That could change, obviously, with global warming now. So part of what Susie's been doing for the last couple of years is burying data loggers where we know turtles lay their eggs. And what we're clear at the moment is none of those temperatures have been anywhere near enough for those eggs to incubate and go full term.
That's interesting.
What we would like to do is do that under a more controlled environment. I'd like to, somewhere here at the college, build, not artificial, but the absolute ideal condition you could possibly find that would exist in the wild without manipulation.
Because we're south enough to have a decent stab at that
we
temperature.
get really good hot sunny weather here, and the other side of the animal management unit is a nice brick. So there's an area that gets a lot more sun than normal. It's protected by brick walls. It would be a slightly artificial environment in that, potentially, you could argue. But we wouldn't put heating, lighting or anything else. But what I'd like to do is say, okay, let's set that all up. here's some turtles, go
Let's
off,
try and breed turtles
have some fun and
outdoors in
frivolity,
England.
and will those eggs go full term?
Yeah.
And we need to do that. Hopefully this year or next year we're going to get a permit issued that we can collect the eggs that have been laid, because people will report the nesting, send it information to Susie, we could then go and collect those eggs and then actually incubate them artificially. That would determine whether the eggs are viable or not, or what percentage of eggs are viable. So that's the next step. But really what we need to do is this research where we have a controlled environment that's natural. Can the animals reproduce there? Because first of all, I think it's going to be many years before we have high enough temperatures in the UK for them to successfully hatch.
Yeah.
If they successfully hatch, that is only a tiny part of the story. Okay, because I think the biggest issue is not them hatching; it's surviving the first winter.
Yes, absolutely.
So, because we keep lots of turtles here and we acclimatise them, what we know is the biggest challenge for the turtle is the spring. Because our climate, well, it's not the cold. They can tolerate any cold that we can throw at them in this country.
Okay.
It's our inclement spring. Okay, so quite often March, February, we get a warm spell.
They come out.
As soon as you get a warm spell, they all pop up, and then we get another freeze.
Yeah.
And they've used the energy that they had to come out, and to move that, and then they've got to go back into hibernation.
Fascinating.
And that's when you get the greatest losses of ones that we keep outside.
Yeah.
Is that time? So if that's an adult,
babies aren't going to be
what is a
able to-
50p baby turtle going to do? Is he going to survive that first spring?
And to be a truly invasive species, something needs to be either detrimental to the economy or detrimental to ecology. And because these animals can't breed, they can't become either.
So what they have to do, they can breed. Okay, so just because a species can establish and breed does not make it invasive.
Okay.
It has to be able to establish, breed, and extend its range. That is when it will become invasive.
Yeah.
And then when it will become a problematic invasive is if there is a financial consequence to that. Okay, so probably if something could establish and extend its range and it's actually not having any impact, then it would be, although it would be an invasive species, it wouldn't be a priority for eradication.
Yeah. So that makes it non-native.
Yeah, so it's a
if I'm
non-native
correct.
species.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is also understand what impact these turtles are having on biodiversity. Do they cause a problem? And we don't know the answer to that yet. Okay. So again, part of Susie's research, and really you should be talking to Susie about her research.
We certainly should.
Not me. But part of what she's doing, which is lovely, and it's a lovely job. I have to collect turtle poo.
Lovely.
Yeah, so that's marvellous. So if we get turtles, we get lots of turtles that have been found in the wild, picked up. They come into us. We keep them separate. We collect the poo, put it in a little bottle, freeze it. And Susie does whatever she does with that. And what we're looking to do is to understand what are they actually feeding on.
Yeah.
And I can't answer that question because it's too early on in that result. But once we understand what they're feeding on, then you'll be in a better position to judge what impact that has on biodiversity. So our advice at the moment is if you find a turtle in the wild, is actually, unless that you think there is a really good reason to move it, i.e. welfare or other reason of problematic, leave it be.
And that's one of the things about the Turtle Tally survey, isn't it? That they're not going to remove them or euthanize them. They're just going to study them.
No, we want to understand where they are and monitor them and see whether this is a growing problem.
Yeah.
It's early days, but the data suggest more and more turtles are being released, and that just fits logically with me because there's what else are people going to do with them?
Yeah.
So,
just to come back to Turtle Tally, what we recommend that you do, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, is during the spring, summer and autumn months, if you see a turtle out in the wild, free range, sunning itself on a log in a pond or a canal or a lake or a river somewhere, then you can go onto the Turtle Tally website and log your sighting. If you've got a photograph to go with it, that'll help us to identify the species. And it just helps to add to our knowledge and Susie Simpson's knowledge more specifically about what these turtles are doing, where they are, what they're eating, and what kind of impact they're having.
Yep. The only ones we recommend removing are soft-shell turtles or snapping turtles.
Why?
Well, because they're both high predatory, the carnivores.
Gotcha.
So really interesting this year. We've had a couple of common snappers that have been brought in because they've been found. We had Susie was contacted by a lady who had a resident snapping turtle that lived for at least 6 years in the back of a canal that ran along the back of a garden.
Cool.
This snapping turtle was living there. So we actually went and retrieved that this year.
Yeah.
Claudia, she's still here, she's outside.
Good.
10 kilos of exceedingly angry snapping turtle.
Snapping turtles can take fingers.
Oh, this Claudia would, yes. She's feisty.
I like her already.
Oh, so we removed. Now the lady was a bit distressed because she herself was a biologist, and she said, "Well,
Made friends.
it's been here, it's lived in all this time, and it's not causing any problem. Not seen any issues." And she said, "I've seen all of these baby coots just sort of you walking on its back, and it doesn't. We've never seen it eat anything. Well, it's okay, but it is a carnivore, predominantly carnivorous. So reluctantly, she allowed us to take it. We brought it back the first day. Obviously, got a bit stressed in the movement. It pooed out a whole leg of a baby chick. So that was categoric proof that this thing was. Yes, it was quite happy for the baby coot to sit on its back, and as soon as it got anywhere near the front end, it just disappeared. So things like that would have a negative impact on biodiversity. So it would have been predating on fish, newts, frogs, anything like that. So our position is, if you do see a common snapping turtle, we would, and there's the ability to remove it, we would recommend that be removed. And the same with the soft-shell turtle, again, there, and we've had a few of those.
Yeah.
But the sliders, which are the most, and the cooters, at the moment, leave them be, unless there's a really good reason to move them.
I mean, the turtle story is fascinating from start to finish, and we could go into a lot more detail about the legislation, the pet trade, the invasive species issues and removal, and what you've done about this. Why is it that we can't apply the same logic to boa constrictors? Why is there not some option for us to converse with the pet trade to stop them from bringing in animals, converse with hobbyists to stop them breeding them, and then to deal with the overflow of animals that eventually end up here in some kind of sanctuary like is happening with turtles?
So let's deal with the last bit first.
Okay.
The sanctuary. Why can't we do a sanctuary? One very simple word: money.
Good point.
Okay.
What would a sanctuary look like in terms?
We have thought about this.
Yeah.
Okay. There's two issues with this, and it's all financial. So, the setup we have here is not for long-term keeping. Okay, so the enclosures are relative. We need to get as many animals. We've got 5,000 square feet, but it's as compact as it can possibly be to keep animals. You wouldn't keep some of these animals long-term in the enclosures we've got. And I've got boa constrictors in cages that I am not happy that I'm keeping them in.
But what choice do you have?
I have no choice. Well, I do. I euthanize them. And if you look at our data system, we're not fluffy here. We will euthanize animals. At the moment, we will only euthanize animals for medical reasons.
Yeah.
So I have two categories, because everything I want to be transparent. I have euthanasia for medical reasons and euthanasia for non-medical reasons.
I've seen your report every year. I don't think I've ever seen a number in that column.
So for non-medical reasons, it's 0. And that's where I want it to be.
Yeah.
Because I'm really uncomfortable at killing healthy animals for no reason. But at some point, that's going to have to change. What do I do? Now, we're in a crisis that we've never seen before. We can talk about that
This
in
is
a
something
bit.
we'll come on to, yeah.
But let's look at the bio. So somebody gives me £1 million. I could build a really nice facility that could hold large numbers of these animals, okay, in ideal conditions, and it's going to cost me 50 grand a year to run it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the best use of that money, or could I take that money and use it better elsewhere?
Oh, what a
if
question.
If money was unlimited, fantastic. Let's do a boa constrictor sanctuary. If money's unlimited, it's not. We work on a shoestring. I have a quarter of a shoestring that I'm working on. So I can't even imagine, at the moment, if I got money, I got other things that I could do with it. So what do? I don't want to euthanize healthy animals if I can help it. We are trying. So industry is we're trying to work with industry. Actually, the pet trade, i.e., the wholesalers, are not the issue. Very few boa constrictors are being imported commercially, if any, now.
Yeah.
So we're not doing it that way. It's ones that are being bred here. And I suspect
By hobbyists?
By hobbyists. I don't know if anybody's breeding boa constrictors commercially. I don't want to go out yet and say, thou shalt not breed boa constrictors. But at some point we do need to say, and what we
Can
have
I
been
ask you
saying,
why? Then why not go out there and say to hobbyists, come on guys, here's a problem, let's not, eh?
that is a very good question. And my argument is I still don't have yet enough data to really make that statement. It's a big problem that's growing. It's been our biggest one since ever. And I'm now at the stage of saying, I really want you to think whether you should breed those boa constrictors. I
think that's a poignant message for us to emphasise.
And I would say that to everyone. Because it's not just us, it's everybody. Boa constrictors are, if you asked any... Now, the problem with rehoming centres is actually there's how many rehoming centres exist? What is a rehoming centre? Legally, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There's no legislation that covers rehoming centre. Okay, so anybody can call yourself a rehoming centre. Now, part of being the cynic, part of the issue I have with it on the reptile side is there are lots of people who, this is unfair in some way, there are a number of people out there that will call themselves a rehoming centre and they're actually just backstreet dealers. They'll just take something in and sell it on.
Yeah.
And that's unfair. So you're kind of judging. There's lots of little people that are absolutely doing it for the right reason and doing a really good job. And there's others out there doing it because they can make a bit of money on it. And because it's unregulated, it's unknown. So if you look at charities, you've got us, you've got the RSPCA at Brighton, and you have Proteus up in Birmingham.
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, that's it. I'm not sure there's others. You have other rescue centres that will do with bits of reptiles. They're predominantly other animals and we'll take them in, and we work with lots of those. And now we have a situation with quite a lot of the responsible ones. If they take a reptile in, they'll get it down to us.
Yeah.
So we're networking with that. And we work with some of the small ones who are really trying to do a good job.
Yeah.
But there's lots out there call themselves a rescue centre, and whether they are or not, they don't know.
Yeah.
And they don't have data. So they don't have data with any of this. So that we're very data deficient. Which is why I'm obsessed with us doing our data as best we can, and we try and encourage others to help us with their data. Some of the other charities are not very forthcoming with that.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think some of the other charities that do major in reptile rehoming, why do you think they don't come through with the data?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. What I will say, what the lesson that I have learned, so the NCRW is a charity.
Yep.
Charities function by people donating money. Bad news, poor abused animals, dumped, abandoned animals, pulls at the heartstrings and opens the wallet.
Yeah.
If you're presenting a different picture to that, people are far less likely to donate. So particularly the bigger a charity gets, the more money hungry it becomes, and the more it becomes a marketing. So they're run by marketing people. It's selling a product, which that product is bad news, sad, poor abused animals, give us the money to help them. If you're not doing that, if you're trying to tell the facts as they are, and for us, abandoned animals have actually decreased this year from last year. So lots of stories are going, abandonment up 60% on this time last year. Yes, 60% more animals are being rehomed, but the ones that have been truly abandoned are tiny. So actually our number is down by about 20% on this time last year.
It's more rehoming than abandonment.
Yeah, absolutely. So abandoned animals is tiny, maybe 40 out of what, 1,935, 40 or so, 41, I guess. Off the top of my head, I'd have to would be abandoned this year.
Which basically harms the poor abandoned animal story that brings in money.
Yeah, or it's beaten, abused, it's
mistreated, bad welfare.
Yeah, we see those. But it's 1%. It's not the 99%. And so it's about marketing. It's about selling. And I think the bigger they are, the more they get involved in this. And they lose sight of what they're about. And it's all about then actually getting more money in to help doing what they're doing.
Does producing data bring more money in or not?
No. So good data that shows the facts actually is negative to your income. So what you need to be able to do is manipulate what you're doing to show how bad everything is. So you need to give me more money than you did last year. So we're creating a rod for our own back by trying to do it the way we're doing it. And I don't know how I'll get round that.
That's a very difficult conundrum to manage. And I don't know what you do about that. But the whole boa constrictor issue, I think, regardless of data availability, regardless of the ability to create a sanctuary, there should at least be some onus on keepers to decide whether or not they want to breed boas and perpetuate what we perceive to be at this point in time a problem.
So we produce an annual report, okay, and it's getting more detailed each year. And in this year's 22 report, which will go out in the first quarter of 23, we are going to put in there a call for people to really think long and hard about breeding boa constrictors. That's our starting point. Where do we go from beyond that? Well, that's a challenge. I don't want the centre to be seen to be really negative and trying to say, you shouldn't do this. I want to make... Most people will listen to reasoned argument, and what I'm hoping is by making reasoned argument, asking people to think. I'm not saying don't do it. If you tell somebody don't do something, they're more likely to do it. So what I want to do, it's been my approach. Let's make a logical, reasoned argument based with evidence to show this is why I'm asking, or we're asking you not to, or to consider this as an issue.
If you love reptiles and care about reptile welfare, why not become a responsible reptile keeping member? From just £4 a month, you'll receive our free quarterly magazine and a window sticker to let everybody know that you support responsible reptile keeping. Our annual membership options offer even more benefits, including discounts, t-shirts and a whole lot more. To find out more, head on over to responsiblereptilekeeping.org.